Ana Montero, Minister for Equality for the Kingdom of Spain. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Muy buenas tardes, Su Excelencia
Good
Doña Elena.
afternoon, Your Excellency Elena Dali, European Commissioner for Gender Economy, Lazar Kamel, Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean, and Arif Hamwandik, Ambassador of Jordan. It is an honor for me to start this conference of the Union for Mediterranean on the strengthening of the role of women in society. It's an honor to host this conference and welcome all of you. And it's an honor to have Spain and the Union for Mediterranean to underpin all of the transformations that are needed on women. We advocate for the culture of this neighborhood through the Mediterranean region. And actually, it's been 25 years since the process of Barcelona that reminds us that an association of the Mediterranean is a strategy so that we can go forward towards a more respectful and just world. For the government of Spain, feminist policies and the rights of women are a pillar of our project as a country and as a democracy. We put more and more efforts in the fight against all types of violence against women and in the budgeting investments needed in order to deploy those public policies that help us guarantee the rights of all women when facing sexist kinds of violence, aligned with the Istanbul Convention. We go forward in the recognition, extension, and guarantee of the sexual and reproductive rights of all of the women. We have also fostered the first public policy on work-life balance so that the care activities are not only borne by women, but so that the state can guarantee this kind of care as well. We also guarantee the rights of the LGBTQ and in particular of trans people because we believe those feminist rights. And of course, we try to those rights that take into account the diversity can help forward the feminist agenda. We are aware of the fact that we are tackling, as we mentioned this morning, great difficulties and uncertainties and way of organizing life economy, and our society needs profound changes, particularly something that is evident after the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine, and something that is quite evident when we see the energy or climate crisis and migration processes. This crisis have enormous impacts on women and girls, and that's why we need collective commitments such as the ones that are gathered by the declaration we approved this morning so that we can create a more just, a more democratic, and a more feminist world. The Euro-Mediterranean region, our common house, can do a lot so that we can achieve these goals. We need to double our efforts in favor of the rights of women and feminist policies that are the rights that are usually challenged whenever crises or armed conflicts happen. I would also like to mention that crises and wars increase violence against women in all its shapes, and therefore its attacks on their rights that are human rights. The declaration that we approved this morning on the role of women in society and on women's participation in society, and particularly the commitments that we all took, allow us to go forward towards a more just, more equal future that guarantees the rights of all women. This declaration is a roadmap that is incredibly valid, that identifies current problems and particularly sets the tone for the fight to guarantee the rights of women. Without women, there is no democracy. I believe that this is the main idea that we need to bear in mind whenever we try to figure out the role that women need to play in society. All women need to be able to exercise all of our social, economic, and cultural rights. Not one woman, but one and every single woman. This is the only way in which we will be able to say the word democracy and really mean it. When we talk about the role of women in society, we need to recognize that feminist fights of all of the women around the world are very valuable heritage. for humankind. And particularly over the last years, women are pushing great democratic advances within the region and around the world. As governments, we need to recognize the role played by women around the world in the fight for democracy, for social justice, for the care of the planet, and for the construction of a better future for everybody. Because actually, I want to recognize all of the women, all of the activists from the sphere of institutional policy and civil society who have actually taken personal risks so that we manage to have these achievements that are nowadays rights for everybody. And I believe as well that we need to listen to those women when they defend peace, because we know that armed conflicts have terrible consequences on the lives of women and girls, even long after they have come to an end. I talk about sexual violence in armed conflicts, in intensification of trafficking of women, but also I'm talking about exile, migrations, and refugees. I'm talking about the dismantling of the most basic systems, as the health systems, the education system, of the lack of opportunities and resources that are usually borne by women and are usually tackled with those informal networks that women create. Those policies of peace that are gender responsive are the most efficient tools to solve conflicts, as the 1325 resolution of the Security Council of the United Nations states. I would like to come to an end and around this Mare Nostrum that actually gathered us, and that gathers 790 million people, that it is essential for us to keep on working together with a strong spirit of cooperation that guarantees that our common challenges can be turned into real opportunities for citizens, and particularly for female citizens within our region. I really hope to see you all again in our next conference so that we can keep on going forward with the consecution of our agenda, and so that we can celebrate our achievements, so that we can say with the biggest urgency that all women can see their rights guaranteed in our region. I would also like to tell you that Spain will be in charge of the presidents of the European Union in 2023, and that we will place feminist policies in the very center of our presidency. Together, we can build, as our commissioner knows pretty well, as she works really hard for this, we can build a more feminist and more democratic union with all of the rights guaranteed for all women. Along history, women have been bridges for dialogue and also bridges for fostering rights in society and for consolidation of our democracy, and so that we all have lives that are worth living. We get together over here today to celebrate this commitment, and with this conference, we create this bridge so that we can achieve this equality goal. I would like to thank all of the governments, all of your excellencies, the European Commission, the Union for Mediterranean, for enabling this conference. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Your Excellency. Now we move to Her Excellency, Ms. Elena Dali, European Commissioner for Gender Equality. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. All the participants carried out at the ministerial meeting. The ministerial declaration, important step as it sets the foundation for our future cooperation in the Euro-Mediterranean region, common challenges and change of experiences, good practice and lessons learned between member states and stakeholders. As I underlined to colleagues earlier, the EU is striving towards a union of equality. Following the adoption of the gender equality strategy, we have achieved important legislative developments to promote gender equality in many of the areas of life. On pay transparency, what we see as barriers to women's economic empowerment is often the tip of the iceberg. Besides barriers and exclusion for women within the labor market, risk increasing with the multiple crises we are contribution to the growth of our economies and the well-functioning of our societies. The rest remains hidden as the data is simply not collected or not computed. This is why pay transparency is so important. Barely 9 months after the Commission proposed a directive on pay transparency, the Council reached a general agreement paving the way for negotiations with the European Parliament. At the EU level, this file is one of the ways in which we can show how serious we are about discrimination, not only in words, but also in law. To keep and attract more women in the labour market, employers must value their contribution and participation fairly and equally. This is why the legislative proposal for pay transparency remains a key priority for the EU. With the directive on pay transparency, we will give women and men the tools to strengthen the application of the principle of equal pay for equal work or work of equal value. The binding pay transparency rules aim to address unjustified discrepancies in pay on the grounds of sex by introducing pay transparency and enforcement mechanisms to ensure that employees can effectively tackle pay discrimination. So pay transparency measures will encourage companies to review their pay settings and allow them to address hidden pay discrimination that may have reflected unconscious biases. Companies that apply fair and equal pay will be more attractive for workers regardless of their gender. To attract more women in the labour market and ensure their financial and economic independence, we need to put structures in place for them to organize their life in a balanced way. One of the biggest lessons we learned from the COVID-19 crisis is how undervalued the care sector is and how informal care responsibilities are restricting women's employment. Today, 7.7 million women in the EU are out of employment because of informal care responsibilities and the lack of support structures. 90% of the formal care workforce in the EU is made up of women. The sector is in clear need of reform, I'm sure you will agree. This is why the Commission published the care strategy to do just this. Part of our plan is to ensure that everyone has a choice when combining private and professional life. For instance, the Commission proposed that 50% of children below the age of 3 are in early childhood education and care, and 96% of children between the age of 3 and the starting age for compulsory primary education by 2030. In addition to affordable, accessible, and good quality care services, parental leave is also essential for women's economic empowerment and work-life balance. This is what the EU law on work-life balance provides. There are minimum standards for paternity, parental, and carers' leave. Most importantly, at least 2 months of parental leave must be adequately paid and cannot be transferred to the other parent. This is key to encourage the uptake of parental leave by fathers too, thereby making it easier for mothers to return to their jobs after a period of family leave. There are also additional rights, such as the right to request flexible working arrangements, and these rules will facilitate the participation of women in the labour market as a result. Thirdly, preventing and eliminating all forms of violence against women and girls is a precondition for the promotion and protection of human rights and for them to participate actively in our societies. The European Commission proposed legislation to make a difference for women all over the EU when it comes to combating gender-based violence And for the first time, rape would be criminalized based on the notion of a lack of consent. This is not currently the case in all EU countries. Female genital mutilation and cyber violence would also be criminalized. We have made proposals to improve access to justice, support and protection for victims of violence. In addition to this, the Commission is also preparing a recommendation on preventing and combating harmful practices against women and girls, including FGM, forced abortion, forced sterilization, child and forced marriage, and honor-related violence. After 10 years of negotiation, we have an agreement on legislation to improve gender balance on corporate boards in the EU. Europe has many highly qualified women. 60% of current university graduates are female. However, only a third of members of non-executive corporate boards are women, and that is even less among executive boards. This legislation guarantees that qualification and merit remain the key criteria for a job on the board. Therefore, it will be instrumental in addressing the problem often referred to as the glass ceiling and discrimination on other protected grounds. To achieve gender equality, we need a gender mainstreaming approach across all areas, political will and concrete action. Today's meeting with our partners from the Union of the Mediterranean puts gender equality high on the political agenda. This meeting is one of many to come, so that we can build on our achievements, monitor progress, and continue empowering women. So let's work together towards a world of equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. And now I call Her Excellency, the Jordanian Ambassador to Spain, Mrs. Arish Hamaudi.
Distinguished speakers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I want to express my pleasure in participating in this meeting, which I believe it was a real milestone towards our ultimate goal of achieving gender equality worldwide. And I will start my speech, which is on behalf of His Excellency, the Minister of Social Development in Jordan. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أصحاب المعالي والسعادة الحضور.
Good afternoon. I am delighted to be here at this high-level conference together with high representatives to be able to strengthen the role of women in society. Our recommendations to support and endorse women in the face of crises such as conflicts or climate change requires a joint regional work based on different initiatives such as the Euro-Mediterranean declarations that aspire to improve the situation of women within the region. First of all, we have to defend our achievements in gender, and also to support women and girls so that they can access equal opportunities, especially in the situation of crisis. Secondly, we need to take measures to be able to end gender-based violence. Thirdly, we need to facilitate the access by rural women in situation of crisis to opportunities as the World Tourism Organization recommends, especially in conflict or exodus regions or in regions under occupation, and also to help women participate in decision-making mechanisms, especially with regard to political, social, and economic spheres. Fifth, to support the participation of women in private and public sectors, especially with regard to policies that guarantee equality with regard to accessing equal pay and equal employment. Six, to apply integration programs within the employment market and to implement minimum quotas for women, especially with regard to high-level positions. Seventh, to guarantee green areas for everyone. Eight, to empower women within their capabilities to safely protect the environment. 9, to help women so that they can actively participate in food security. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And now we move to His Excellency Nasser Kamel, Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean.
Thank you very much. Dear Minister, dear Commissioner, dear Co-President, I'd like to thank you all, but most importantly, welcome all of you to the 2022 UFM High-Level Conference on Women for the Mediterranean. But let me start by paying tribute to the fantastic work the Spanish government has been carrying during the organization of this important conference, and more broadly, to its continued efforts for the promotion of gender equality and women empowerment. The active engagement of Spain in the UFM activities remains central, and I would like to express once again my really very warm appreciation, dear Minister, for your firm support. The organization of this edition would not have been possible without your commitment and all our partners, especially the Commission, which I thank also quite vividly. Today's conference provides an opportunity to further come as one to strengthen women empowerment and women's rights across our dear Mediterranean region. Indeed, I feel privileged to welcome here in Madrid so many representatives of governments, but also civil society organizations, the private sector, regional and international organizations, including financial institutions and international donors. The participation of all stakeholders engaged in the field of women empowerment in the Euro-Mediterranean region, and that we all know have managed to achieve tangible changes within their communities, perfectly illustrate UFM multi-stakeholders approach. Your vision, experience, success stories, and good practices always enrich our work, and we really look forward to listen to what you have to bring to the table during the next 2 days, especially in the current context. Indeed, the progress towards gender parity has been slowing in 2022 due to multi-layered and compounding crises like the COVID-19 pandemic, the climate emergency, of course, and the widespread conflicts and displacement, not only in the MENA region, but now in Europe. Millions of women and girls are currently denied access to opportunities. And this halt in parity progress, and we were talking about parity yesterday, is disastrous for the future of our economies, cultures, and communities. Accelerating parity ought to be a top priority for both the public and the private sector. That's why we need to hear from you today and tomorrow on what it is to be done and what is working and what still needs to be improved in our region. Ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, the new UFM Ministerial Declaration on strengthening the role of women in society that was mentioned by the Commissioner and the Minister, which was approved by our Minister this morning, is an important document. It is because our UFM ministers agreed that considering the various crises we are currently experiencing, be them related to health, climate change, or more recently to emerging needs such as food, water, energy security, special efforts are needed to strengthen women's economic and political empowerment, as well as to end violence against women and girls in the Euro-Mediterranean region, building on the fact that for any sustainable change to take place, women need a well-recognized leadership role in all areas of life. We'd like to invite you during this next 2 days to contribute to this newly adopted ministerial declaration and shape the roadmap for its implementation in the years to come. We look very much forward to the high-level roundtables that will tackle this afternoon already 4 central topics. The first one, of course, is on women economic participation. Women economic participation. Why? Because according to estimates by the World Bank and PwC, increasing female employment could raise the GDP in this region by an impressive 57%. Moreover, digitalization can help create more jobs in the field of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, what we call STEM, where women in our region happen to be studying intensely. So digitalization would boost the employment of those women, those young women currently studying those fields in university, and we need to explore how to efficiently harness this potential. The second theme regarding women and climate change, we have to recognize that the management of natural resource sustainably in terms of mitigation and adaptation to climate change, the preservation of our ecosystem, the development of resilient future for our society and especially our indigenous and rural women, and the preservation of biodiversity depend all on gender equality. And the empowerment of women and girls have a very important role in this regard. For climate change mitigation and adaptation to be successful, women must participate in debates and decision-making processes. The third thematics, if I may say, or topic, is regarding, unfortunately, the remaining phenomena of violence against women and girls. We know that women who experience violence are less able to participate fully in society and experience negative effects on their general well-being. It has a high cost, including diminished production, increased demands on the healthcare system, litigation fee. Yes, we know that at least 155 nations have domestic abuse laws in place. Another 140 have laws against workplace sexual harassment. But however, there is many difficulties still persisting in enforcing these laws, limiting the access of women and girls to protection and most importantly, to justice. So let us see together how to improve on this dimension in our region. Finally, the fourth topic, which is women and leadership. When we look at the figures, we find that out of the top 500 company, only 8.8%, let's say 9%, have women CEOs. Moreover, there is only 13 countries with a woman as head of state, 15 countries with a woman as head of government. Only 21% of government ministers are women in our region, with only 14 countries having achieved 50% parity, and Spain happened to be one of them. At the current rate, gender equality in the highest position of power will not be reached for another 130 years. That's unacceptable. More women leaders are an absolute must in the world we live in today. Ladies and gentlemen, going back to Barcelona after this conference, we will be enriched with all the reflection and conclusion raised here on those topics, and with the firm resolution to amplify our action based on them. I am deeply convinced that everyone here shares the same vision about the urgency to leave no one behind. With your cooperation and active participation, we can work together for more inclusive societies and ensure that the role of women in our Euro-Mediterranean societies develop consistently together and stronger. I cherish your presence, I applaud your commitment, and I wish you success in your fruitful deliberation, thus rendering the high-level conference on women for the Mediterranean a success to look back to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We have another two high-level speakers who couldn't be here with us today, but for sure they have prepared the video for you. We'll start with the first video from Her Excellency, Ms. Svenja Schulze, Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany. Thank you so much, Your Excellencies. You can already step down. Thank you for the message, the reminder of the urgency that we have to carry on with us and make sure that we make the right efforts to create an equal and inclusive region, the region that we love, the Mediterranean. And then we will watch the first video from Her Excellency, Ms. Schulze.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, fellow advocates for gender equality. It is a long road to true gender equality, and that is true for all places in the world. And my ministry is pursuing a feminist development policy. We seek to ensure that women enjoy equal rights, resources, and representation worldwide. I have laid down binding targets for this. Among other things, we will increase the share of bilateral funding that contributes to gender equality to over 90% by 2025. In order to facilitate economic independence for women, we have launched, for example, the Team Europe initiative for decent jobs for women and young people through trade and investment. Together with the European Commission, France, Italy, and Spain, we will be investing 2.8 billion euros in the Middle East and North African region. One project under this initiative is Womena. It helps to build women's networks and to provide better career advice for women in the region. Gender equality can only be achieved if power imbalances and discriminatory social norms are changed. That requires us all to take joint action. And I am pleased that by adopting today's ministerial declaration, we have laid down ambitious goals, especially on ending gender-based violence, but also with regard to women's economic and political empowerment. In the future, the German Development Ministry would like to discuss with you how to jointly achieve these goals based on a structured dialogue both through international fora, such as the Union for the Mediterranean, and bilateral. And I am moved by the courage of the women and men who are fighting for gender equality all over the world, many of them putting their lives at stake. Their commitment reinforces our determination to jointly work for gender equality. And in that spirit, I wish you inspiring discussions.
The second video is from Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General of the World Health Organization. Thank you.
Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, I thank the Secretary General and the Co-Presidency of the Union for the Mediterranean for inviting me to address you today. Around the world, the COVID-19 pandemic, combined with recent conflicts and climate-induced emergencies, have worsened gender inequalities and increased the risks of gender-based violence for women and girls. Globally, almost 1 in 3 women and girls aged over 15 have suffered either physical or sexual violence at least once in their life. This is truly unacceptable. Violence against women and girls is a violation of human rights and a major public health problem. WHO is working with member states of the Union for the Mediterranean to promote gender equity, to prevent and respond to violence against women, especially during emergencies, and to strengthen access to services for sexual and reproductive health. Addressing the needs of the most vulnerable communities is essential if we are to pick up the pace towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Increasing the proportion of women in health leadership roles is crucial. WHO commends member states of the Union for the Mediterranean for taking decisive action to strengthen your national gender equality policies with today's declaration. And we remain committed to working with all of you for a healthier, safer, fairer world. I thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I would like to share with you that we have a graphic artist who's basically trying to summarize all these amazing discussions through art. So we will have the chance to look into the summary after every session. Now we will start our first roundtable on women economic empowerment, and I would like to call our high-level speakers to join the floor. I'll start with Her Excellency Maya Morsi, the head of the Egyptian National Council for Women, to join me. Thank you. And Ms. Natalia Efremova, Deputy Minister of Labor and Social Policy in Bulgaria. Thank you. And Dr. Jordi Curel, Directorate General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. And last, Ms. Fatou Haidra, Managing Director, Directorate of Global Partnership and External Relations at UNIDO. Thank you. And I will come and I will sit with you to continue the discussion. Do you hear me? Hi, everyone. Perfect. So now we start our first roundtable on women economic empowerment. I would like to remind you that since the launch of the UFM regional dialogue process on women's economic empowerment in 2015, important progress has been made in the region. We have seen different laws, framework have been adopted and reinforced. We've also witnessed new programs and policies to push for women economic empowerment and participation in the labor in the region. However, we have also seen persistence of social inequalities, gender stereotypes, negative social norms, and discriminatory practices against women, which is blocking women's advancement in all areas of civil, economic, and political life. So the objective of this roundtable is to ask some few questions. Where do we stand when it comes to women economic empowerment in the Mediterranean region? What is holding us back from achieving the full economic empowerment? His Excellency has mentioned that it will take us 130 years. It's very worrying and it's very alarming. So what we can do with this occasion to actually make the real change for a better humanity and better future for our region. So I will start with Her Excellency, Maya Morsi. Thank you so much for being here today with us. What are the good practices that have been implemented in your country since the UFM ministerial meetings? I'm talking about Istanbul 2006, Marrakesh 2009, Paris 2013, and Cairo 2017. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be with you. And waiting for 130 years to achieve gender equality, I think we're asking younger generation to wait for the impossible. It's extremely important to know in our countries where are the sectors that would actually, when you add or increase women in, you are having a multiplier effect in the other sectors. In 2018, we have applied a specific study that shows us that there is, in the private sector, working on social care, education, health, clothing, industry, retail, trade, services, manufacturing of computers and electronics, and information technologies are very important sectors that increasing women in would increase in the labor force at large. 78% of all paid work in private sector establishment, including childcare centers, nursing homes, and homes for people with special needs, is also a real must to increase women in the labor force. So the care economy ranked first among female jobs among all sectors, then education and health is the second, followed by manufacturing industries. So if there are the specific sectors are known, what's the problems? What are the challenges that we're facing? Is it legal regulatory frameworks, meaning women limited access to adequate training? Or is it the labor market ecosystem itself is the challenge? So what we analyzed is that if there is high cost of childcare and housework that is only carried by on the burden of the shoulders of the women, the entrance into the job market is challenging, the exit from the job market is expensive, and the re-entering again to the job market is impossible. So we should focus on policies that is making sure that women, when they enter to the job market, they stay there, getting married, having children, they are there. We have, as I mentioned in the morning, the strategy that is endorsed by Egypt has an economic pillar, economic empowerment pillar. So we focused on changing and amending investment laws and recognizing women as the main breadwinner as well, equivalent to the man. Amending the civil laws with 4 months maternity leave instead of 3 months. New regulations issued for mobile payments that would facilitate lives for women. Ratifying social security and pension law. And in addition to finally the labor law that is being discussed at the parliament in a couple of weeks, it's going to be also applied. Is it only working in private sector or also establishing entrepreneurship that is also important for women? So what we worked on is lifting the restrictions on women's ability to work at night. There was a very old version of decisions by the labor ministry, and this also has been removed. All sectors has been open for Egyptian women. Issuing a code of conduct to protect from violence against women in work environment and financial companies, grant women specific benefits such as equal opportunities for career progressive in civil service and care facilities. Issuing also a code of conduct for public transportation and conducting awareness in railways and metro stations. The major challenge that I think not only Egypt but any country would face is the ideational change. It's important that the younger generation would accept and believe that having a working woman, it does not mean that she is, how can I say it? I keep on saying that when we say that family comes first, does not mean by any vocabulary that work is second, but actually it is work and family is important for women. Her family, her children are important as much as her colleagues and her constituency in the parliament. They both are the same. So we should not value only the working women and not valuing the working mother. Both are important, and hence encouraging mothers to continue working and continue after having children is something that needs awareness, needs legislative reform, and needs also women as role models, helping others to continue their lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I will move to Ms. Efremova. Can you share with us more about the experience in Bulgaria? What kind of good practices have been implemented already to enforce women's participation in economy? Thank you.
Okay. Hello, dear colleagues. Today we have asked to try to make a roadmap on the implementation of the declaration that we have adopted this morning. So let me share some experience that I bring from my own country, Bulgaria, with some good examples on the way we are trying to implement and to have equality between men and women in our society. Why the empowering women particularly important is for Bulgaria it is for some main reasons. Firstly, the empowerment presupposes a comprehensive political framework to ensure equality. Empowering women means having political, economical, and social conditions as enabling environments for the full participation of women and girls in all areas of public life. It also means opportunities for free choice for such participation. Ladies and gentlemen, it may seem easy, but in fact, it means enormous work, starting from legislation, but mostly having a very understanding society on how to build the balance between the professional life and the personal life of women. My personal interest and the commitment of the topic of equality between women and men has been for some years because originally I am responsible for managing one of the biggest program in Bulgaria, which is co-funded by the European Social Fund. It is called Human Resources Development Program. And it's really inspiring when we see how our measures implemented on the ground make real difference in life of women. We see how we can create jobs, how we can create employment for young people. We have some specific measures on this balance between the professional and personal life. So it is really how to say, it's really interesting but very difficult to work in this field and achieve results that you can see. You cannot touch them, in fact, these results. But let me share some statistics from Bulgaria, which is very important for us to share with you. Improvements could also be noted in the area of women's empowerment. In the process of political decision-making, the proportion of female ministers in Bulgaria increased from 32% in 2010 to 41% nowadays. And at the same time, the one of the female members of the parliament increased from 22% in 2010 to 27% nowadays. But the best results for Bulgaria are reflected in women's participation in economic decision-making. For example, the share of women in the board of governors of the central bank is 4 times higher than it was back in 2010, from 14% till 57% nowadays. So it's a good achievement for us. Creating equity levels for women and men in all areas of public, economic, and political life has become the main goal of the national strategy for promoting equality between men and women for the period 2021-2030, and the plans for its implementation. Some of the priority areas of action in the strategy are related to the economic empowerment of women. These include increasing women's participation in the labor market and an equal degree of economic independence, eliminating the differences in payment and participation in decision-making, overcoming gender stereotypes. In order to promote the full participation of women in the labor market, a series of measures have been implementing at reconciling work and private life were conducted since it has an impact on the employment of women and their positions on the labor market, income, and economic independence. Therefore, the scope and accessibility of childcare services of dependent family members were extended. The introduction of flexible working schemes, the regulation of homework, and the distant form of work were another step forward on reconciling family and professional life. Another group of measures for economic empowerment of women is aimed at overcoming the differences in gender pay gap. Although, according to Eurostat, Bulgaria has lower than the average of the EU, still we have lots of work to do. These measures are particularly important as the abolition of differences in payment between men and women corresponds directly to the increase in the income of women that receive in their lives. This reduces the risk of poverty of women of working age and after retirement. The difference in payment is mainly due to the gender segmentation of the labor market. Thus, a significant factor for economic empowerment of women is overcoming a segmented labor market, improving the gender balance in economic sectors and occupations, increasing women's participation in high-paid sectors and in decision-making processes, including promoting female entrepreneurship. In this regard, we continue to work on overcoming stereotypes in choosing education and profession that will lead to developing children's talents and their realization according to their abilities and qualifications. Measures for professional orientation of girls and boys are undertaken which promote professional realization in careers in STEM. Bulgaria is ranked first in EU by share of employed women and girls professional in ICT sector with 28% with an average of 16, according to Eurostat data. I'm proud to share with you that 50% of scientists and engineers in Bulgaria are women, which is above the average of European level. Eurostat data also shows an increasing absolute number of female scientists and engineers in Bulgaria. Women participations in management creates a perspective that leads to competition and cooperation between organizations' teams. The key leadership qualities required for include the ability to collaborate, connect, emphasize, and communicate. Statistics show that companies led by women have really better financial results, and women leadership is a prerequisite for a more promising personal and professional future. Equality between women and men in decision-making is important because real progress cannot happen without diverse perspectives in leadership roles. Maybe as a final statement, I would like to emphasize that the development of education and information technologies is becoming more and more urgent and important nowadays. Prioritizing the issue of equality between men and women in the political agenda of the Union for the Mediterranean would give a new impetus and coordination of efforts in this regard. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for sharing these experiences from Bulgaria. I'm sure we will all learn something from it. Now my question is to Dr. Curel. I have a first question on, could you please share with us the most gender-sensitive actions that have been identified by the countries in the framework of the ministerial employment adopted in May? And where do you see a possible alignment with the ministerial declaration adopted today? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. And indeed, I think it's an important one because it shows that the issue of women participation in the labor market and the issue of women empowerment is an issue which is cross-cutting, as we all know. And indeed, when ministers gathered in Marrakesh, ministers for employment and social affairs gathered in Marrakesh in May this year, one of the issues that they were looking at was the situation of women in the labor market. And I think that we have been seeing in all the interventions which have preceded that this situation is worse for women than for men. I mean, we see that the rate of unemployment for women is higher than the rate of unemployment for men. We see that the number of needs, that is to say, people who are neither in employment nor in education or training, is higher for women than for men. And we see, and I think that this is even more telling, is that the female participation rate in the labor market is much lower for women than for men. So indeed, this is something that ministers were looking at. And if you look at the conclusions of the ministerial in Marrakesh, you will see that they do resonate very clearly with the conclusions that were adopted earlier today at the ministerial on women. I will mention just some highlights, and you will see that there are no surprises. You will see that one of the commitments was to promote gender-responsive employment and social policies, to support women's engagement in building socioeconomic resilience and recovery, in particular after the pandemics and now with the consequences of the war of aggression of Russia, to tackle the digital gender divide, which does also exist, to promote employment and decent work for women, and as well, it was being said just before by the Egyptian colleague, to attract and retain more women into the labor market, because indeed, when a woman leaves the labor market, it's very difficult that she comes back, and to reduce the gender pay gap and the career advancement gap, and an equal distribution of unpaid work between men and women. I think that those are topics or resolutions, I would say, which we should look at from 2 points of view. First of all, when we look at the situation of women in the labor market, and we have seen that the data is very clearly less favorable for women than for men, we have to look at it from two points of view, as I said. The first one is that behind these figures, we have individuals. We have women who, precisely because they are more at risk of unemployment, they are in a worse position in order to participate in the labor market than men, etc. We have individuals who are suffering from that. And that's something that, if only for that, as a matter of fairness and justice, let's say, we should act. That's one thing. But then economically, it's also a big mistake. And I think that the Secretary General of the UFM gave some figures as well about what is the impact, the negative impact of this lack of participation of women into the labor market. So that's one thing which I think is important and that we have to bear in mind. The other thing is that if you look at the resolutions that were taken by the ministers, and of course, with all due respect, there's not much new under the sun. I mean, we have been talking about equal pay for ages. I mean, just in the European Union, the treaty which founded the European Union back in 1957, that's a while ago, already had an article which said that women and men were entitled to the same pay for the same job or for a job of equal value. And yet we see that, I don't know, 80 years later, we are still there. So that's one thing. We have been saying that the participation of women in the labor market must be increased. And yet we are still there, etc. So I think that the time now is to move to a higher gear and to be very concrete about how to implement these policies. And what we see is that a law which is appropriate, a law which is fair, a law which really provides for equality is not enough, because this law at the end of the day is not applied. And it's not that it's not applied because people are mean or because things like that, it's because structurally it's not applied. Let's take equal pay. This, I just mentioned that, this has been happening in spite of the fact that in most countries the principle of equality is enshrined, if not in the constitution, in the different labor codes. So we have to move to a higher gear, and that's what the Commissioner Dalli was telling us just a moment ago, is that beyond that we need to move to pay transparency. And we need to give the individuals and trade unions and the associations which are active in this area, to give them the tools in order to see whether this, how the pay is formed and whether this entails discrimination or inequality in terms of gender pay gap. And I think that this is something very concrete, and it's something that should bear its fruits. Same thing with the participation of women. It seems pretty obvious, I think, to all of us, that the fact that women have a heavier load of responsibilities at home is clearly hindering their participation into the labor market. So again, it's not just a matter of saying that women have the same right, that we know, thank you, let's move on. And that's why, and again, Commissioner Dalli said it just before, the European Commission has put forward a care strategy. We must make sure that the care responsibilities which are more important or which represent a heavier burden for women than for men, that this changes. Otherwise, we will not get there. Same thing for social protection. What we see as well, and of course, this is due to the different employment career and the different pay that men and women get, we see that older women are more at risk of being in poverty, because of course they have not been able to build the same rights to social security than men. And indeed, here again, we have to come up with specific proposals in order to make sure that the law, which is already, I wouldn't say perfect, but which is already appropriate, is really implemented in order to achieve this equality, which, as I said, will bring benefits to individuals, and this is something which is very fundamental, but which will also bring benefits to the whole economy and therefore to the well-being of all citizens. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And just to follow up on that, in the framework of the Regional Team Europe initiative, Jobs Through Trade and Investments in the Southern Neighborhood launched this year, which concrete action will specifically target women in this initiative specifically?
I will be very brief because the topics overlap on that. First of all, what is this Team Europe initiative? It's an initiative that was launched in Marrakesh just at the occasion of the ministerial that took place there that I just referred to. And it aims at mobilizing funds and resources in order to, in this particular case, to create jobs through trade and investment. I mean, what we see is that the issues of investment, the issues of trade, when it comes to the relationships between the two shores of the sea, are very much fluent, I would say. There is a big flow of trade and a big flow of investment between the two shores of the sea, while when it comes to jobs and to the cooperation into job creation, this is a bit more unequal, it's a bit more difficult. And therefore, we are convinced that there is a strong potential to create jobs through trade and investment. in order to do that, of course, we have to really make sure that jobs which are created are sustainable jobs, that jobs which are created are decent jobs, and that investment is a growth, has a growth dimension, which will in its turn create jobs. And this is very important. And then the main point when it comes to women is, again, I mean, when we look at the situation of this specific part of the world, it's which is very diverse, of course, and there are different situations in different countries. But what we see, and this is, I think, pretty shocking, I would say, is that the female labor force participation in this region, in the South Mediterranean, was 22% in 2019 compared to 53% globally in the world. So I think that this is something that we'll have to address. And of course, this initiative by streamlining gender equality should contribute to growth and therefore should contribute to the integration of women into the labor market. So that's, of course, the overall framework. And then as the initiative and this Team Europe initiative develops, they have the mandate to come up with concrete and specific actions in terms of increasing the participation of women into the labor market.
Thank you so much. I will move now to Ms. Haidara. We are in this context talking about the Mediterranean region and cooperation altogether. How would you see an effective regional cooperation to advance and push for more women in economy? How concretely will make that happen?
Can you hear me? Let me start by saying that we have concrete examples of UNIDO's contribution to women's economic empowerment in the MENA region. Before giving you these examples, I would like to say that UNIDO's interventions are all demand-driven and are also integrated. We adopt integrated approach. I will share with you 3 examples, one at the regional level and 2 national levels, where we support the commitment, political commitments contained in the declaration, ministerial declaration. The first example I would like to give is the regional project that we have on promoting women's empowerment for inclusive and sustainable industrial development in the MENA region. We call it PIWI in short. As I said this morning, this is a project financed by Italy and Monaco. The main objective of this project is to strengthen women's employment and entrepreneurship. And for that, we have 2 complementary pillars. One is finance and access to market. But to take benefit of the market access, we need to have quality and quantity production. So these 2 main pillars are done around what we call value chain approach. Actually, what we did is to map out the potential of different value chains in the region and see which one have the highest potential for employment for women. And we did that in 7 countries. And these countries are, just for information, Algeria, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco, Palestine, and Tunisia. In Tunisia, for example, we are promoting access to market for women-led businesses in the natural cosmetic value chains. The project I'm talking about, the PIWI project, also create opportunities for regional networking among women, entrepreneurs and business associations. And one concrete outcome of this component of the project is the joint UNIDO UFM MENA Women's Business Club that were launched in February. Another pillar of this project is knowledge building activities. This is done through regional studies on women entrepreneurship and ICT dissemination. And also we have, in the coming weeks, we'll have a white paper on good practices and lesson learned in relation to female entrepreneurship development.
Recording in progress.
At the regional level. National level, we have a project in Jordan called Level Up Project on advancing Jordanian industries. And the aim is to create decent job opportunities for women and youth. And this is done through the improvement of the business environment and competitiveness of SMEs in Jordan. This project is funded by Italy, and we partner with the Jordanian Ministry of Industry, Jordan Enterprise Development Corporation, and Jordan Export, as well as the incubators Bridge for Billions and Seed Stars. The major pillar of this project is what we call Level Up Accelerator. This is provide business incubation for and accelerate service to over 50 SMEs in selected gender and youth sensitive value chains. My last example at the national level is in Egypt. This is a project called Rabeha Project. And this aims at increasing women's economic participation and empowerment in Egypt by mid-2024. And this is funded by Canada. And we also run this project jointly with UN Women and implemented in partnership with the Egyptian National Council for Women, the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and the Agency for Micro and Small and Medium Enterprises. Here also, the project aims at providing knowledge and awareness raising, and also training and monitorings to female entrepreneurs. From these three projects that I have shared with you, these are examples of UNIDO's approach to women empowerment. It covers many pillars. The reason is that to ensure women economic empowerment, it takes multi-stakeholder approach. It also takes a cross-sectoral approach. This is why we cover finance, we covered market access, capacity building, knowledge sharing, and information sharing, including networking among women entrepreneurs. So these are some of the three concrete examples, which all of them have achieved some tangible results in the MENA region, and we are committed to continue our support to the declaration made today by the ministers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all speakers. If I can summarize this first roundtable, first of all, we need to build on the policies that we have already that exist and make sure that they are applicable. Make sure that our policies actually push women to stay at work and make sure that they are there to guarantee it. Definitely invest in women. What I always say that the best way to support women is to give money to women, to buy from women, to invest in women. It's the best way actually to make sure that she will be active. She will be on the ground working and making sure that she's active. And definitely make sure that we work together on a regional level, that the cooperations that we can build together can create a lasting change, a serious impact, not only on national, local level, but also for a regional level. Thank you so much for your time, for your insights and your expertise, and looking forward to have you around for the other sessions. Thank you. Let me remind you that you can always, be active. I'm sorry, this microphone is playing games with me. Please make sure that you tag UFM Secretary on social media. use the hashtag Women for the Mediterranean and share the live stream with your community. This would create more awareness about this declaration because it goes beyond just a piece of paper. It's a declaration that would help to shift and shape the future of the Mediterranean. Now we will move to our next roundtable, this time on women and leadership. Let me call our distinguished speakers. I'll start first with Her Excellency Claudine Ayoun. She's the president of the National Commission for Lebanese Women. Hello. And followed by Ms. Birgit Loosers, co-chair of the UFM Senior Official Meetings at the EU External Action Service. And her ambassador, Maria Jesus Conde Zabala. She is the special envoy on foreign feminist policy for Spain. Thank you. And yeah, hello, hi. Yes, you can definitely, yes, right here. Thank you so much. I mean, this roundtable is about leadership. And if we look into the declaration, the ministerial declaration, it has been highlighted like very bigly and very widely that women's full and equal access to leadership and decision-making is essential for promoting resilient, fair, and sustainable democracies and effective execution of its principles. So this is a very important key point for the ministerial declaration. Today, more girls are going to school. Very few girls are forced into early marriage. More women are serving in parliaments and positions of leadership. And we have been witnessing that more laws are being reformed to advance the gender equality across the region. However, we still see that there are many challenges that are remaining for us to solve. As we look into different discriminatory laws that still exist, the social norms that remain very pervasive, social mindset that's still very conservative, which makes women underrepresented in so many leadership positions and political leadership. So what has changed since 2006? How many women in politics today? And how many women in corporate boards? All these questions that we will explore with our distinguished speakers. So I will start with the first question to Her Excellency Ayoun. What measures has your country taken in place to assist women's leadership, and what has changed in your country since 2006? Thank you.
Is it working? Okay. الحضور الكريم. Let's talk about leadership in Lebanon. تختصر صفات الإنسان القائد.
Good afternoon. A leader needs to have emotional intelligence, resilience, and confidence. But unfortunately, when we talk about female leadership, we normally use the English word leadership, which means that female leadership is something new and that needs to confront many intellectual remains that still want to see women as the weaker, vulnerable gender, or maybe sweet and tender gender. But nowadays, we have statistics and realities that point out at the fact that even nowadays, women in 2022 need to participate more actively in their struggles in order to take the place that they deserve. We also see how women are asked to demonstrate and justify why they have leadership roles. We see how on the 6th of July of 2022, there were only 28 countries that had a female head of state or a female head of government. And out of them, 13 were heads of state, and only 14% of the countries have an acceptable minimum share of women ministers. And actually, very often those ministries are the ministries of family, of ministries dealing with disabilities and the elderly. Therefore, we believe that we're going to need some additional 130 years to reach a full equality between men and women. This from a political perspective, but from an economic perspective, this situation might even be worse because 2.3 billion women do not have the economic rights that men have. In Lebanon, for instance, women, thanks to their struggles, have actually stopped social violence despite all of the crises that we have endured over the last years. But this is something we cannot perceive in higher spheres. 24% of women actually participate in the economic market compared to 76% of men. When we talk about the political crisis in Syria, we need to talk about an increase of refugees coming from Syria, arriving into Lebanon, which has negatively impacted the resources of Lebanese citizens, which has actually resulted in more precarious lifestyles. On the other hand, when we talk about leadership roles or management roles, well, we have to say that we have reached interesting percentages. For instance, when we talk about civil servants, but we still have very few women taking up managing roles because men still do take more than 60% of those roles. It is true that there have been changes in the way women are perceived because we see women police officers and even a defense minister who's a woman. But the percentage of participation of women in our government has gone backwards because the progress we had achieved was not sustainable, because it depended on the willingness of our head of government. So now we work at the National Agency for Women Affairs, and we worked there last year, and we will keep on doing that in the future, and we're going to try to come forth with an amendment of electoral legislation so that we can adopt quotas, because the vast majority of political parties have accepted this proposal, even though it hasn't been adopted yet. We also need to encourage women to participate in decision-making processes, both when it comes to municipal and provincial and national levels. We also want to deploy programs meant to proactively empower women that would support women once they do reach leadership positions. When we talk about political parties, we want to encourage them to involve more and more women. And in that regard, we're thinking about creating an academy to promote women's rights. We also need to amend the municipal electoral legislation to establish minimum quotas. And in that regard, we want to promote women participating in decision-making processes within the private sector so that we can offer women wider access to financing and so that they can take part in entrepreneurial projects which will actually contribute to their own economic empowerment, and which will allow them to reach greater life-work balance. So in 2020, we passed a law to tackle sexual harassment, and we're launching several awareness campaigns in this topic. We're also promoting work-life balance laws that allow women to be part of the employment market and still have a private life. In that regard, we are promoting laws that are establishing maternity and paternity leave so that both parents can take active care of their children. We also want to launch a fund to support women in general, and particularly women who are victims of gender-based violence. We also want to work in order to modernize educational curricula so that boys and girls can have knowledge and awareness about equality from a very early age. In that regard, we also want to turn informal economy into formal economy, since this is taken up vastly by women, in order to create a more just and inclusive society. As you can see, there are still many differences between men and women, but we're working hard to overcome these imbalances and injustices suffered by women. And this is why we're here today, because we believe in social justice, in equality, and we believe that all together we can make this project come true. Lebanon is actively involved in the struggle and is not willing to give it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll move now to Ambassador Isabella. How would you describe the experiences in Spain when it comes to women leadership? Do you have any concrete practices that have been implemented to push more women into leadership in politics, in boards, in general?
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the UFM to give me the opportunity so that I can talk about Spanish feminist foreign policy. I'm not going to talk much about what has been done in Spain because our equality minister is here actively participating in this session. But what I would like to do is to say what it has entailed for Spain to have a feminist foreign policy. Last year, our president of government presented a foreign feminist policy with an action framework so that we could progress in real equality between men and women all over the world. Having this kind of foreign policy, it means that in all decisions made by the Spanish government, in all of the actions undertaken by the Spanish government, the equality between men and women is an intersecting presence, both when we're talking about bilateral, multilateral, regional or international levels. To give you an example, this means that, for example, in any bilateral meeting that a minister may have whenever traveling abroad, they will always have a concrete action with that country meant to improve the situation of women and girls. Having this feminist foreign policy represent a step forward aligned with certain changes that have been happening in Spain since 2004 when the first law against violence against women was passed. And then we've had a number of laws meant to guarantee the sexual freedom of women, or the law that is known as Only Yes is meant to be understood as MES. And then ever since then, We are working in order to have an efficient and real equality between men and women, and this entails, of course, guaranteeing work-life balance, the equal participation in the care of the family, and the active participation of the government in this regard. That is why we can say something that you all know, I'm sure, which is that we have made enormous progress over the last 25 years since the declaration of Beijing, but we still have enormous challenges, and we're seeing reversals in some countries that are neighboring countries. We have seen enormous reversals in the recognition of sexual and reproductive rights of women, for instance, or the rights of the LGBTQ plus community, and we have witnessed as well the different impact that COVID has had on girls and women, a disproportionate impact. And this disproportionate impact entails as well armed conflicts and the climate crisis. That's why I believe that this meeting is vital, and our work here from the Union for Mediterranean, in which Spain plays a very big role, is fundamental so that we can all contribute to fight all of these problems. A feminist foreign policy, our feminist foreign policy, has identified 5 priorities, which is women, peace and safety, the protection of the rights of women, the fight against gender-based violence, the economic empowerment of women, and women participation in all decision-making processes. We've got some tools in order to achieve those goals that actually go through the intersecting presence of gender-sensitive policies. Then we are, for example, carrying out different training programs meant to reinforce this aspect. And we are incorporating this into our foreign policy, as I say, in multilateral diplomacy, bilateral and European diplomacy. We're including this mainstreaming of these gender-sensitive policies. When it comes to our multilateral diplomacy, I would like to point out the efforts that we are making in order to eradicate violence against women and girls through different resolutions and the constant support to the mandate of the representative of those who fight against violence against women and girls. We also believe that in all of these actions, we are making sure that women participate, reinforcing their sense of agency, and we're also making sure that feminist organizations participate as well, because we are deeply convinced of the fact that violence against women, or not being able to decide over the freedom of their own body, does not allow women to make decisions about their own future or exercise their leadership. The agenda for women, peace and security has been a very priority initiative for women. We participate in this regard in different networks, amongst which the Union for Mediterranean, and we want to take part in all of the organizations that foster the presence of women as agents for peace. In terms of recent resolutions, for instance, we had that is meant to take into account the participation of women when it comes to impact of the COVID-19, and all of these have been approved and supported by Spain. I would like to briefly say that out of the 150 million euros that have been invested in cooperation, 47% was targeted to supporting initiatives to promote the leadership of women in decision-making processes. Out of these millions, 17 millions, so 24%, target initiatives in the north of Africa. And I would like to point out the fact that we have put forward the Masar initiative or Reza initiatives, in which leading women from different countries of the north of Africa and leading women in Spain are working together to reinforce the links between the public and private sectors. I believe that it is also important to point out the ELLAS initiative that supports the leadership of women in all decision-making processes, particularly when it comes to political participation. And I would like to wrap up by saying that what we are trying to convey in our foreign policy, we're trying to apply locally as well. Because all countries, we have certain ministries that are lagging with regard to other. For example, the defense ministry have been traditionally more male-dominated ministries, and we only have 27% of women who take part in diplomacy. And we've done a lot of progress, but when we passed a year and a half ago this feminist foreign policy, we only had 14% of female ambassadors or head of missions, and this year we have a 25%, so that's improvement. We had already set out this target for a year ago, but I'm very happy to say that we managed to achieve it this year. And other good news regard that with the fact that we have a 57% of women who are graduating from the diplomatic school. We had equality for the very first time last year. You know, we're talking about a ministry that has been traditionally male-dominated, but I think that these results are good news for everybody. And I'm going to wrap up now. Having a feminist foreign policy is an ambition, is a process that takes time. We have had other countries trying to do the same thing before. We know that there are many challenges ahead, and there could be political change that would imply certain halts in our efforts, but we need to stay alert and we need the collaboration from everybody. This is not an exclusively female topic. It's a topic that involves us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your very interesting insights. I'll move now to Ms. Lusser. Are we going on the right direction? How would you describe the policies, the reforms that have been taking place on regional level to push more women into leadership positions? Are you thinking that we're going on the right direction?
Thank you so much, and I do my best to answer that one. But first of all, let me thank you for providing so many participants, including so many renowned women, to address the issue of women in leadership, to which I attach great importance, having had the pleasure myself to serve for many great women leaders in the EU system. All started, of course, historically, with Simone Weil, a French survivor of the Holocaust and fighter for women's rights. She was the first president of the directly elected European Parliament back in 1979. And I had the huge chance to meet her briefly, personally, in the early 90s in Paris, when I had first official duties to do. And since then, not many people know this, but in the EU system, the Common Security and Defense Policy, for which I served for 25 years, actually was very much shaped by women. You don't know these names, so the only ones I can quote to you are, of course, the two female high representatives, Mrs. Lady Ashton and Federica Mogherini, two other outstanding female representatives. And today we have the pleasure of first ever Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, in our midst. As I say myself, I also in my 25-year career managed to accede to some leadership positions, including the co-chairmanship of the UFM senior officials, but I was previously in another function, the first ever female deputy operations commander and chief of staff of our CSDP, civilian CSDP missions. Let me use this background and experience to try to address your question, and let me please, I hope you allow me, by doing it in the following way. I would like to first ask myself the question, why does women leadership role not only in politics, but also in the private sector and even at far lower levels matter? And when I say leadership, I mean leadership. Leadership can be the headmaster of a small school in a village. That is also leadership. If a woman has this post, let's not just go into the ministerial and other such levels. So again, why does women leadership matter? There are, in my view, 4 main reasons to take women leadership serious and to take it also to a new level. First of all, when you find women in leadership, it means that the society has achieved equality. It means that women are enabled to reach management posts, meaning they have had the necessary education and they were given a fair chance to arrive at the top. Second, it means that any processes and policies that are led by those women in leadership get a chance to be developed and implemented with the women's rights lens, meaning they help ensure to complete the work of equality and fairness where it is still required. Thirdly, according to the UFM Ministerial Declaration adopted earlier, there is also a good chance that there is a greater trickle effect on women who aspire to become leaders. They see what their fellow sisters can achieve and they will work harder to arrive at the same post. And fourthly, every woman in leadership helps to defy the still existing stereotypes and misperceptions on what women can do or should be doing. Now, this sounds all good, and back to your question, but is this the reality of things? Unfortunately not, as many of the discussions today and those leading to the finalization of our joint declaration have already demonstrated. The last years in particular, as we've heard, have not been easy ones. And this despite the earlier UN commitments in the context of also the Sustainable Development Goals. Instead of marking progresses, we have been or are facing significant drawbacks, and the cascading crisis of COVID-19, the climate emergency, and rising economic, political insecurity, progress on gender equality has not only failed to move forward, but has begun to reverse. Around the world, a growing backlash against women's rights is threatening even well-established freedoms and protections. So even, I would dare say, in the EU, where achievements seemed steady and where were even taken for granted, women's rights and equal chances came under strain. Why is that so? Because, as is referred to in our UFM declaration, studies show that crises always hit the vulnerable harder, and vulnerability remains a common thread of women in all societies. And can you even believe that I read recently, I quote, across the G20, only 47% of people are very comfortable having a woman as head of government, and only 48% are very comfortable with having a woman as CEO of a major company. This means that despite strong commitments and knowledge that balanced leadership is the key to unlock our common challenges, women are still largely left out of leadership or even senior level positions. And this is true for all areas, whether it is politics, the economy, finance, peace and security, the health sector. Let me contrast this very grim picture with another set of statistics that we found. It's from Women Direct. I quote, "Countries with greater proportion of women among top decision makers have lower levels of income inequality." Another quote, "Companies with high proportions of women in executive leadership positions are more profitable." And my third quote, "Peace agreements are 35% more likely to last at least 15 years if women leaders are engaged in their creation and execution." This shows how powerful it is to include women, not because women are inherently more talented, but because diversity yields higher and better results. Women do have a crucial contribution to make. So what can we do? What should we do? Of course, the EU is pushing for more and working hard to support women in leadership positions. There is, for example, the EU strategic approach to women in peace and security, which also includes capacity building for mediation, for example. There is a global strategy for our foreign and security policy, which also reaffirmed the need to promote roles in women in peace, security, and in leadership positions. We have an EU gender action plan that goes even one step further. It calls for women's participation in peace processes and also in social and economic sectors and decision-making processes of all sorts of political and public life. There is a new partnership with our southern neighborhood, the Agenda for the Mediterranean, which likewise has been putting leadership women promotion in the center of our activities. There is a very other beautiful example of external activity after the takeover by the Taliban in Afghanistan. The EU was creating what they call an Afghan Women Leaders Forum, which brings together women that are still in Afghanistan, but also outside in the diaspora. And they together form a voice of Afghan women, which you will agree is something really needed and pertinent. Now, again, this is all good. You will agree with me, but I think we should add that we also require practical tools to follow up on implementation of all these agreements and commitments. And here we look to the added value that we hope the UFM framework will provide us with by doing what the Secretariat of the UFM was saying, that action plan that they want to develop. For this action plan to be successful, I would like to add 2 points. My hope is that the concept of gender responsive leadership is following, will be included into this. I mean with this, the enabling of both women and men in leadership positions to challenge unequal structures. Gender equality is still too often pushed to the margin in our institutions and in the global debate. It's often just said, you mean gender? No, we mean something with this and we need to tackle it. And second, I think a gender focal point in any system can help with mainstreaming effectively. We have one in our EU External Action Service, and thanks to her, we have reviewed job advertisement selection procedures, administrative rules. Having a gender focal point really helps, and everybody who doesn't have one should consider, I believe, putting one in place, and that in order to make implementation of commitments more effective. Thirdly, I think we should not forget the critical enabling function of education, access to education for girls and women. Without this, they will always find it difficult to even think of leadership positions. Thank you so much. I'm very confident that with today's and tomorrow's exchanges, they will help all of us to get a better understanding where we are at and what we can do together to propose and support new actions and solutions in view of fulfilling full equality through adequate numbers and levels of women in leadership to achieve a lasting societal change and system. The EU will remain a steady and trustful partner in supporting women's aspirations, the freedom to choose their path in life and to follow their dreams. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the fact that you've shared with us. Do you hear me now? Perfect. Sorry. Thank you so much for reminding us about the work of Simone de Veil and the legacy that we have to continue in ensuring that women have the opportunities and they have the space where they can be leaders. I think with the ongoing crises that are happening today, more than ever, we need the female leadership. Thank you so much to all of you for your insight and for your time. And here you can see this beautiful artistic explanation what happened so far. It draws into our first and second roundtables, focusing on economic empowerment and women in leadership. It shows the actions that we need to do tomorrow, and the measures that we need to take today to ensure that women are active in job force and they are represented in leadership positions. Thank you so much for this amazing artistic craft. We will move now to our next roundtable, focusing this time on gender equality and climate change. I would like to call to the stage our distinguished speakers. I will start with Mr. Placido Plaza, Secretary General of CIHAM. Are you with us? Perfect, thank you. Please join us. And I will call Mr. Carlos Conde, the head of the Middle East and Africa Division for ACD. And I would like to call also Ambassador Sinin Florenza Palo, Executive President of IAMED. And lastly, I would like to call Miss Ariana Senzi, Deputy Mayor, please go ahead, Deputy Mayor for Mobility of Milan, member of Harlem. Thank you so much, and please take a seat. Thank you. Hello, hi. Thank you so much. We're just setting up everything, the technicalities. Thank you so much. Let me remind you that the Sustainable Development Goals Agenda, adopted by the UN, member states in 2015, has set a 2030 deadline for the achievement of gender equality under the goal 5 and preserving our planet under the goal 13 for the climate change. We have less than 8 years to meet the goals. Where does the Mediterranean region stand when it comes to these two important goals? We're going to explore this and more with our distinguished speakers. And I'd like to start with the first question to Mr. Plaza. According to the UN, women comprise over 37% of the world's rural agriculture employment, a figure which rises to 48% for low-income countries. How can we ensure that women play an important role in preserving our planet?
Does it work? Yeah. Bien. Merci beaucoup et bon après-midi à vous tous. Je pense que je vais être le premier à parler en français.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I think I'm going to be taking the floor in French. I'll be the first one. I would like to thank the organizers and the Union for the Mediterranean for inviting us to this meeting. As General Secretary of CIHAM, it is an honor to represent the voice of rural and agricultural women in this forum. In the declaration, rural women as well as other challenges related to agricultural sphere have been included. Let's remember that Mediterranean women play an important role in agriculture and rural development. They are essential with regard to food security. In certain countries of our region, they represent more than half of employment in agriculture, and they are in charge of managing important jobs and farm-related employments. They generate wealth for households, As the Ministerial Declaration states, inequalities still exist with regard to the participation in the economic, social, and political field, but this is even more so in rural areas. Women suffer even more this isolation in rural areas, and they have limited access to basic needs and infrastructures. Comparing them with urban women, they have less access to education and to the development of competencies, as well as using services such as transport, healthcare, financial services, etc. Within the healthcare, also, we have less access to new technologies, employment market. It is more difficult when you are a woman, and especially if you don't have a legalized professional status and if you don't receive a pay for it. On the other hand, law tries to protect them, but habits in these regions have an impact on women sometimes. With lower education, rural women are not very well informed with regard to their rights. They participate less in public policies, and this means that they are underrepresented in institutions that manage rural and territorial development. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a situation that we must take into account. Challenges with regard to inequalities are persistent. As for climate change, the Mediterranean region is suffering its impact. This is important with regard to accessing food, especially in the most vulnerable areas, taking into account droughts, floods, heat waves that we have been suffering and we will continue suffering in the region. Food insecurity risk is rising. Very few sectors such as fisheries and agriculture depend so much on climate. These are sectors that suffer climate crisis more than others. Food insecurity, droughts have an impact also on informal economies, and this, in many cases, means women. Climate change affects both women and men. Rural women work in sectors that are heavily dependent on climate, such as agriculture and fisheries, but also they do so informally. They are ill-informed, have little protection, and they don't have enough representation in many organizations. They are more exposed to vulnerability and poverty. On the other hand, the number of hours that women devote to work can have an impact on girls going to school. Domestic work, domestic cause can sometimes seem more important than education. With regard to climate crisis, women are always the first ones to suffer because they are responsible for feeding their families, and they make sure that they feed all the members of their family. So food insecurity has an impact on peace, on the environment, because conflicts can worsen this situation, impacting women first. This representation of challenges has to highlight the triple divide of women, inequalities of gender, social inequality, and economic inequality. For this reason, among the actions that have to be launched within a potential roadmap associated to this declaration, we think it would be interesting to consider an initiative that would allow to strengthen collaboration with multiple stakeholders in rural areas. We consider that the stakeholder approach and multifaceted approach is the foundation for the action that we have to undertake. A closer collaboration between equality stakeholders within the agricultural and rural sphere is a must for us to be able to act and fight these inequalities, taking into account the current situation. To set an ongoing dialogue has to be possible through the creation of specific spaces and mechanisms that link all stakeholders so that agricultural systems in the Mediterranean are adapted, sustainable, and can also provide solutions instead of creating problems. This has to be attractive for women of the region. My organization is undertaking significant efforts to be able to participate in these exchanges and gatherings. We have financial means that have to be mobilized to be able to identify the needs of the different stakeholders, to share knowledge and to share also statistics as the foundations of our lines of action. We need to incorporate the territorial approach. It is essential to develop all of this together. I think that we are focusing on private sector funding, but other stakeholders also have interests and knowledge that they could share. So not only financial resources, but also human knowledge that can be brought forward by the private sphere. Once again, I would like to reaffirm the commitment by SIAM with regard to this initiative. Anything that has to do with training, education is essential in territorial and local organizations that have set important priorities in training.
And we need to actually support those scientific projects that are needed for an agri-food transition. And clearly, these approaches are more favorable for women, and therefore they can be applied at a necessary scale, and they need to be anchored in this reality, and they cannot be isolated projects, but they need to have a real deployment capacity in the territory. Well, it seems clear that higher coherence of equality policies is needed, and I say this within a context in which the budget goes down. We have no other option but to actually try to intersect this decision-making process and to apply an operational analysis within the territory. And the territory in this case is the Mediterranean, that is a very diverse territory that has different governance. And this is the message that I wanted to convey to you. Thank you. Thank you for your intervention. We definitely need more coherence within our policies.
founded. I would like to ask you what has been done so far to ensure that women in southern countries have full access and can obtain secure access to land to owner. As we know, many countries in the southern region, still women cannot access to land. What has been done? What are we doing to ensure that?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you in this panel with all friends and institutions that are partnering with the OECD for a long time. Thank you for the question, which goes very concretely with one very specific aspect of the declaration and the follow-up implementation that we all together want to contribute to. And congratulations to the UFM for the adoption of the declaration this morning. Well, I think we need an overall view of what are the factors that can ensure a successful implementation of this declaration that is calling for very targeted attention to a large number of public policies. And we need to look into which factors can really improve the quality of these policies. I'm very glad to speak after Plácido because he has mentioned some aspects that need good attention and are very much in line of our pieces of advice on how to better look into the declaration in these aspects that put together environmental policies with gender policies. And indeed, as Plácido was saying, is still insufficient evidence about how both policies have to be interlinked. Plácido has given very good examples, for example, of how the gender considerations are important to understand agricultural challenges due to climate change. But I would say that in our assessment of different policies, agriculture is quite an exception in the sense it's a policy that knows better than other policies what are the gender implications. Because we know that climate change is having effects on women that are even more devastating than for the overall population. For example, we have data from the UN Environment Programme estimating that 80% of people displaced by climate change are women. So it's important to improve our understanding of these consequences to target good policies. There are also opportunities, as it's important to understand that when we are talking about green friendly policies and we are talking about green growth, there are very important opportunities also for women in that. And when we are thinking in the jobs of the future, we need to look into the green transition from the specific gender angle. For example, I will give one figure for the Mediterranean region that I find particularly interesting. We need to think in the green jobs and the green innovation that will open new opportunities to access to the labor market. For example, in the MENA region, most of the green jobs will be linked into the renewable energy and the energetic transition. Well, some studies are showing to us that the energy sector in renewables is much more female friendly than other economic sectors. So, for example, in the renewable energy sectors, 1/3 of workers are women compared to 1/5 in other sectors. This is to say that the green economy will also provide with new opportunities. In terms of the implementation of the declaration, there are two elements that we would like to underline. One is the importance of evidence, indicators, better information to accompany the implementation of policies. And on that, we need to be aware that the lack of goals, targets, and data is a key challenge to overcome policy obstacles. Today, we have very little evidence about this interlink between environmental and gender policies. According to a very recent survey of the OECD, only 7 OECD countries are collecting gender disaggregated data related to environmental policy making. This is, of course, very insufficient, and this calls for reinforced efforts to better understand this. In that sense, we welcome very much, and we are collaborating with the UFM on the monitoring mechanism, and we think a good contribution would be to further incorporate the environmental dimension to the gender indicators that the UFM is contributing. And on that, the point of departure is not so promising, because if we are taking into consideration the SDGs, for example, only 20 out of 114 SDGs indicators having an environmental angle, only 20 out of 114 are genderized. So this means that we need to go already further and beyond the SDGs. There are a large number of gender-related indicators. So we have very limited gender disaggregated data, for example, in SDGs related to water, sustainable production, climate, energy, and cities. We need to advance in that. We consider, and this is a very concrete, let's say, suggestion for the new editions of the monitoring mechanism elaborated by the UFM and several partners. We are many of them here today. That already taking these SDGs that make the right connection between both would be a very good way of improving our information. For example, SDG 611, measuring the proportion of population using safely managed drinking water services on access to safe and affordable drinking water by sex. This is a very concrete contribution that can improve very much our understanding of the situation in the region, or SDG indicators measuring mortality and morbidity rate attributed to environmental causes. So this is one first piece of suggestion, also very much connected with the intervention of Plácido. There is a second one that also we need to be aware when talking about the implementation of the declaration, which is the financial resources that are fundamental for its implementation. And indeed, financing climate change is one of the main discussions that will take place in the next few days in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt in the COP27. I had the privilege and the pleasure of participating a few weeks ago in the new capital of Egypt, and we met with Ms. Maya Morsi there on a very important conference organized by Egypt on financing climate change with a very important African perspective. And then we are still very far from reaching the needs in this direction. There is a positive direction, and in the conference in the new capital of Egypt in early September, it was mentioned that there is a growing consensus. Different stakeholders from different backgrounds have a common language and have a common understanding of the challenges, but still a lot has to be done. In the context of the UFM, I think is a very a unique combination of countries that are ODA recipients and also donor countries. And one important piece of information is that the aid of cooperation policies need to work much harder in connecting both aspects. In the OECD, we are making the follow-up of how all the ODA going to environment and gender is evolving. And for example, I can tell you that in the last 10 years, the ODA going to environment and gender has quadrupled, moving from 4.4 billion in 2010 to 18.9 billion in 2019. So there is much more on that. But what is interesting to see is that both targets are disconnected. See how the ODA going to environmental issues and the ODA going to gender issues. We have our development cooperation directorate found that only 0.04% of the all climate-related ODA is genderized. So there is a lot to do in mainstreaming gender considerations in all the financial aspects of financing climate change. This is for ODA, but of course ODA is not enough. We have to think also in the public investment, but also more and more on the contribution of the private sector to all the financing of the different actions necessary in this goal. So we think is also fundamental in terms of policy making that we invite and we sit with the private sector and we improve the conditions for the private sector to be also a partner in financing the policies that, such as the ones that have been targeted in the declaration approved today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Since you've mentioned investment and finance, my next question will focus on that, and it's for both Mr. Ambassador Palu and also to Ms. Sanzi. How can we better mobilize financial resources in order to increase gender responses, investment in the framework of climate change and environment and disaster risk reduction policies and program for women?
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you very much, anyway, in the first place for inviting me to participate in this forum as Executive President of the European Institute of the Mediterranean. We've been working for 30 years, more than 30 years now on Euromed issues, and we've been always working on gender issues. The point is that now we have a new agenda that's been proposed from different places, European Commission, UFM, etc. My point is that some of these, especially as for the gender approach, is a cross-cutting approach. So I know that there are specific issues. Plácido has mentioned some of them because he's a specialist on agriculture. From the point of view of the UNIDO, which I salute specifically because for a few years I was president of the board of UNIDO at my years of Spanish ambassador to Vienna, to the United Nations institutions in Vienna. And this is true. These are splendid examples to show how women success much better than men in most of these affairs. In a previous life, I was Director General of the Spanish Cooperation Agency, and so we conducted a great number of programs, well, first in Latin America, then in the Arab world, in Africa, in Asia. My experience, if I may say it without hurting my fellow men friends, is that the guarantee for success in a cooperation for development program is the participation of women. By the way, that's the truth. And specifically, you were asking about financement. Recently, I was asked to give some names for a very appreciated prize, international prize. And I gave a man of women whom we helped at the beginning with not much money to start microfinance, especially for women in a country in Northern Africa. They were right at the beginning of this small organization of civil society confronted to many different problems. I visited quite recently what they are doing, and I was astonished. I was really astonished. It's become an incredible organization. They work as closely with ordinary women, especially, as they did at the beginning with this kind of working groups, you know, microfinance, how it works. And it was, again, to my humble, if you allow me, satisfaction to see how this small seed we had planted 30 years back had grown so wonderfully, and being they have been helping more than 2 million people all along these years with small loans that have helped families to get along in their lives, to start a business, etc. And I'm sure, absolutely, that was because it was done with women. So my point is that we have a traditional agenda on gender affairs. And we have some advances and some setbacks. But in fact, the gender approach has to be across the board in all programs. And so I would just mention some key points to make the point, if you allow me to say it so, of these big changes in the gender approach in the Mediterranean, because it is, of course, seen from an environmental point of view. The first thing is that the Mediterranean area is a very fragile area from an environmental point of view, and we can see it every day. It's not normal. This climate in Madrid, when I was a child, at this time, we were freezing, really. We were buying marron cooked at the corners in the street by women who came for this special occasion, bringing these nuts from the mountains. And we were all freezing, so we were happy to eat this warm thing and to have it in our hands, no? And now we see, I came this morning from Barcelona. In Barcelona, I could have gone to the beach. So the impact of that is enormous. But I'm sure that women are not part of the problem. They are part of the solution. Let me give only a few hints of the general approach, because I always remember these wonderful studies that were conducted by the UNDP, United Nations Programs for Development, from their seat in Beirut. So it was, as you know, it was produced by Arab intellectuals, etc., who were studying the societies south and east of the Mediterranean and in general the Arab world. And they produced these wonderful, many years back already, these wonderful reports on human development. And they were hinting at three main deficits that were necessary to be overcome to fill the gap that exists in the Mediterranean, north and south. And they were hinting a deficit of freedom, a deficit in knowledge, and a deficit in empowerment of women. So 1/3, if you allow me to measure it so, of the general problem for the social, economic, cultural development of countries south and east of the Mediterranean, to overcome this gap and to make this rapprochement with the European counterparts is because of the lack of empowerment of women. I always remember this assessment made by the UNDP, which was very much illuminating. Most of us who were studying already on Euro-Mediterranean affairs. And so at the European Institute of the Mediterranean, we have been working on that all the time. You will find in your bags or your this volume that we produced in this time, as we had done in other previous UFM or before Euromed conferences on women. Remember the first one in Istanbul, then another one in Egypt, and we produced a volume asking some specialists to produce what they would have to bring their reflections, etc. And so you will find it in this case. In our website, you can find the volumes we produced in some previous ministerials for UFM ministerials on women affairs or previously Euromed affairs. The second hint on this enormous change that women are at the forefront. Well, there is a very synthetic figure that hides an incredible transformation of our societies in the Mediterranean area. In the time of independences, for example, in Morocco or in Tunisia, which I know better because I lived there for some years, but it was about the same in most Arab countries at that time, by the end of the 50s, 56, let's say. Fertility rate was 7.3 to 7.4 children per woman. A few years back, let's say by 2010, it has gone down to 2.01 in the case of Egypt and 2.07 or something like that for the case of Morocco. Some other countries are a bit higher, but far below the 7.4. This very synthetic figure hides an immense transformation because that means that women have been able to access somehow, maybe in the informal economy, but they have access, they started to participate in the economic and social life, that the family organization is different, that the social organization of our patriarchal societies, although we still have much to go to overcome our shortcomings, so it is a very complex societal changement that has been produced and we can express it in very synthetically in this. Well, this is part of the traditional agenda. Now we have this new agenda for the Mediterranean. And in the new agenda of the Mediterranean, we have to face the new challenges. And the new challenges are the ones that have been produced by the globalization, by the expansion of industrialization in the whole of the planet, and which has produced the challenges of climate change, of the environment, decay, the challenges posed, on the other hand, by the need to digitalize all across sectors. And my point is that, again, the participation of women, as always, it is not part of the problem, it is part of the solution. And I had here some of the cases that we have been studying more closely, but I will spare it from you, especially through we created a few years back the La Fondation des Femmes de la Méditerranée with some friends from all these countries in Northern Africa and in Europe. And they've been working on helping the organizations of women, and especially in rural areas, to be able to better work in their organizations. So we have been focusing on helping civil society organizations of women to have better tools to accomplish the goals that have been proposed by, in each case, by the institution, be it educational or be it providing microcredit or be it especially in the rural and backward areas. So this Fundación de Femmes de la Méditerranée, or Fundación de Mujeres del Mediterráneo, is still very active. You can find as well many indications in our website. And I salute very much the new agenda that's been proposed by the European Union and the declarations that have been produced by these UFM ministerials on women affairs, because it is necessary to show the way into the future. I think that it is our task, the people who are working with civil society, to help them to follow this line. In the first place, provide as many evidence or research as we can. We're conducting some research networks, as Euromesco, for example. But it's not as an entomologist would do studying the insects in the Northern Atlas. No, it is a policy-oriented research What has to be done to overcome the challenges we have now, and with especially the new challenges that we have in the environmental issues, in the climate change. But the approach is that the more the women participate, the better will be the result. So my point is mainly, we need, of course, especially programs addressed specifically to women for these specific ends. But whatever we do on gender issue will benefit as well in a direct manner in these specific issues, whichever they are. And so, well, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ms. Sensi, if you can answer the same question, how can we mobilize more resources to have gender responses for environments?
Thank you. Thank you, Sana, and thank you to all of you. I would like to start from a point of view. The point of view is how people that represent local authority can work for reach this point. And I'm doing as a local and regional authorities and in a representative of Haarlem, and Haarlem, you know, is a Mediterranean, Euro-Mediterranean regional and local assembly, and the member of the European Committee of the region, and 50 partners, country partners of Mediterranean, as well as association active in the Mediterranean. This assembly is a forum for dialogue and cooperation between the country of the free shore of the Mediterranean. But the point of view is the point of view of women and men that work very near the people, very near the problem. And in that part, we can build something that can help to realize the agenda and the meaning of the agenda, the ODG of the agenda. The topic of our discussion today has been the center of the work in our action plan 2020-2022. One of the three main priority was women empowerment, but the other of the three was climate change, because this is the big problem now. And I think that the women's empowerment and gender equality in terms of right opportunities is one of the essential assets to foster regional stability and socio-economical development. In order to encourage more stable, prosperous, and inclusive society. In this sense, I think that, as I said this morning, the point 30 in which there is the card that you approved this morning of local and regional authorities has been recognized as a catalyst for change, for gender equality and women empowerment. Already in 2018, Haarlem adopted a report on women's empowerment in this region, which contain a set of 12 recommendations to advance in this agenda. One of them commended the critical role of civil society and non-government organizations, as well as religion authorities in the promotion of gender equality and women empowerment. For this, Haarlem built everywhere in each meeting the dialogue between national and local government and CSOS, religious organization, and on how to build laws, measure, and to promote gender equality and women empowerment. Gender equality and climate change. This is the theme for the reason that each of you say. Global warming has a detriment impact on access to food, water, and other basic needs. It caused further hardship to the most poor population, who also have to deal with hard weather conditions and an increasing number of natural disasters. Because of their socioeconomical condition and their perceived role in society, women and girls are less access to research and education. It makes them more exposed to the consequence of the climate crisis as less capable of responding to its adverse effect. As a matter of fact, that 80% of people displaced by the climate emergency are women and children. This is why we believe that it's pivotal to integrate gender perspective into the preparation, design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of policies, regulatory measures, and spending programs of climate-related policies, making them evaluable tools for releasing gender equality. This is why the last 12th of October, we adopted an opinion on the Committee of the Region rule in boosting subnational climate diplomacy ahead to COP27 and 28, in which we emphasize that climate change has a distinct gendered dimension, as globally, women are more affected by the consequences of climate change, and therefore women's leader participation in climate negotiation is paramount for effective climate action. Subnational climate diplomacy can help bridge this gap. Proportionally, more women are active in local politics than on the national level. We build there the leadership, as you say. Finally, we welcome the establishment of a dedicated agenda within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the process of United Nations, the enhanced Lima Work Problem on Gender, and the Gender Action Plan for addressing the lack of a gender-responsive and gender-sensitive implementation of climate policies, and for ensuring that women's voices are included in the global discussion and in international negotiation on climate change, and specifically welcomes the appointment of national gender and climate change focal points for every party. We stand ready to cooperate with INFCCC and other relevant partners in this field. In conclusion, from a subnational angle, Harlem, as the Committee of the Region, contribute to our joint efforts in partnership with the UFM, the areas identified in the Ministerial Declaration, and also in the fight against climate change. And we will to continue to do in the future, because local and regional authorities play a leading role in territorial development close to the citizen, and they are key to building resilience in the area of Mediterranean. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Sensi, and thank you to all of you. I think the summary of this roundtable is that we have two big issues: gender inequality and environment. We can only solve them by solving them together at once. And I hope that this will drive us into concrete actions on local level. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. And here we are with this beautiful, thank you, beautiful summary done by our graphic artist, basically showing the summary what we have discussed. A woman, 3 women basically holding our planet, and we can only save our planet by having women being part of the dialogue regarding environment, being an actor of change, an actor of decision when it comes to dealing with serious issues related to our environment. Please take pictures and make sure that you tag UFM on social media and use the hashtag Women for the Mediterranean. Thank you. This way we can raise more awareness about the Ministerial Declaration. Meanwhile, I would like to call our speakers, high-level speakers for the last session for today, the last roundtable on violence against women and girls. I would like to call Her Excellency Awatif Hayar, Minister of Solidarity, Social Integration and Family for Morocco. Please come and join the floor. I would like also to call Her Excellency Amal Nashwan, Minister of Women's Affairs in Palestine. And I'd like to call also Ms. Angela Rodriguez, Secretary of State for Equality and Against Gender Violence in Spain. And last, I would like to call Ms. Biljana Pejovic, Head of Department for Gender Equality, Ministry of Human and Minority Rights in Montenegro. Thank you. And welcome. Thank you so much. One of our speakers will come soon, so we can already start this panel. I would like to emphasize that according to the UN reports, violence against women and girls, 35% of women in the MENA region have experienced some sort of violence in their time life. There are indicators that the percentage might be higher, and that nearly 4 in every 10 of all women victims of homicide worldwide are killed by an intimate partner. 133 million of women alive today have experienced genital mutilation. In Spain, since we are in Madrid, in Spain, during the first quarter of 2022, 40,481 women were victims of violence by men. This is very alarming, this is very worrying, and it actually makes us wonder, where are we heading? Are we failing women? Are we failing to protect women? So during this discussion, we're going to have cases from the 4 countries represented in this roundtable to understand what has been done and what should we do further to ensure that women are protected in our region. So I have one question for the whole speakers at this session today, which is what are the legal reforms, the concrete actions that have been implemented in your country to protect women against violence? And I will start with Her Excellency Awatif Hayar.
Thank you. In Morocco, we have adopted an integrated approach to face the problem of violence against women. And this approach, I would say, it can be summarized in 5 pillars. The first pillar is about prevention. So we have developed programs for sensitization, namely the campaign against violence, campaign to face violence against women in November, and also programs for sensitization in schools for kids and also in families. Because you know that most of the violences are occurring in the family. So not only sensitization between men and women, but also for the education of kids, because you know the first years, especially 0 to 6 years, are really very important, so that kids can be educated about respect to the equality between girls and boys. And the second axis or pillar is the protection. So we have adopted in 2018 the law for lutte contre la violence, or facing violence against women. 103.13. This law is very important because women are, thanks to this law, they feel protected, and also we have thanks to this law, the people who are aggressing women are punished. So the third pillar is punishment, is that by law. By law, this act is prohibited and punished. So this is very important. And the fourth pillar is le circuit de prise en charge. So we have developed a network of centers. This year in 2022, we have implemented 82 centers. 82, why 82? Because we have 82 cities and provinces. And so in each city or province in the rural area, we have at least one center with what we call l'accueil d'urgence, with the capability to host these women and to take care of them some days or weeks. And also what is very important in this fourth pillar is that we ask the NGO that are taking care of these centers. This is in agreement between the state, between my department and the NGO. We are funding them. So we have we ask them to implement the circuit de prise en charge, or what we can call maybe care system, so that they will be all the steps, the connection to the justice court with health, and also all the steps for taking care of women facing victims of violence. We have also we have a collaboration within the Declaration de Marrakech. This declaration was stated by Her Highness La Princesse La Mariam in 2020. And this council headed by the princess there are many departments and the key actors, and each actor has some commitments to deliver. And for my department, it was these centers. So we delivered the 82 centers. We are also the 5 pillars, I would say, is the empowerment. So that in these centers, we take care of women, but also we accompany women so that they will get out from this spiral of violence, thanks to empowerment, to help them to have an economic activity. We give also we developed Academy of Tamkin, or Empowerment Academy, which is an online academy that currently my department is working with NGO and with partners to develop a video that can be downloaded online, and the women can have their video for leadership, for entrepreneurship, rights, what are their rights, how they can find partners, for example, for their projects. So for us, it's very important to access to knowledge, to access to be accompanied through this leadership program. And to conclude, I would say that this is good, but it's not enough, because we have to work on the effectiveness of law. We are running currently an evaluation of the law 103.13. And we see that there are many things to be improved. So we have to work on the effectiveness of law. We have to work on something which is very important, are the stereotypes, the stereotypes, and this is something very important. This is why I mentioned before that 0 to 6 years is very critical, is very important to educate boys and girls about equality and gender equality. And also we have to face le mariage des mineurs, or child marriage, and we developed a program with education and the justice, so that we have some automatic warning when the girl leaves the school. So we know that when the girl leaves the school, she will be married in the coming months, or this alert or awareness help us to detect these cases, and to go with the l'assistance sociale or the social care contact, to go to the family and see what's going on. And this year we succeeded to get back to school 20,000 girls. 20,000 girls get back to school, which is important. And just the last thing I would like to mention is that we are also working to develop the ecosystem, especially the training and the education of les assistantes sociales, because we don't have enough. And we developed a program with all the universities, and this year we are targeting to register for a program, a dedicated program, 1,000 assistants sociales, because we have 20 universities, so each university will train 50 people. So that's some insights from Morocco.
Thank you so much for these very interesting insights. Now I will move to Her Excellency Nashwan from Palestine to share with us what are the measures that have been already adopted in Palestine to combat violence against women.
يعني في البداية بنتوجه بالشكر الجزيل لمنظمين هذا المؤتمر المقيم، ونبدأ نقول استمعت باهتمام بالغ لكافة الجلسات اللي عقدت من الصباح لغاية هذه اللحظة.
First of all, I would like to thank all of the organizers of this very important conference. I've listened to all of your contributions with attention. I've worked in Gaza, Jerusalem, and other areas, and I've noticed how many rural women have participated in rural activities. I've seen that women who have built their own homes, but that they have seen these houses coming down. I've seen women in Arawar who built a pond that was then eliminated by the occupation authorities. I've also witnessed how women have worked or have been the ones who were actually making sure that their children stayed at home. We're talking about the economic empowerment and leadership and participation of women in decision-making processes. But I was thinking, do us Palestinians live according to the same standards as the rest? We have some international commitments, but we don't lead good lives. We've got many women who are prisoners in Israeli jails. Many of them are mothers of children who are 2, 3, 4 years old. Whenever these women cannot hug their children, can we imagine how much they can suffer and what sort of impact this situation has on these women? We're talking about women who've suffered from exploitation and then were imprisoned afterwards. These are women who live without limbs and therefore don't have access to services for their children. I live in the Strip of Gaza, and therefore I don't have access to health services. We're talking about environmental pollution. 85% of water resources in Palestine have been stolen by Israelis. We only have 15% of them. We have access to water resources only once a week. So when families have access to these resources once a week, how can they lead a dignified life? When we're talking about environmental pollution and when we're talking about bombardments, well, we need to take these issues into account. All of the nuclear waste is taken to our areas because it's 60% of the Palestinian population. 60% of the Palestinian population suffers from the presence of nuclear waste that affect women, children, the elderly, and so forth. So this is the true pollution. Where are our needs? Where do they stand? When we talk about children, Hamad is a 12-year-old child. 50 soldiers entered his home and arrested him. We're talking about a 12-year-old child. How can we actually accept that 50 law enforcement people enter his house to arrest him? So we're talking about the development of justice. We're talking about the commitment with the pertinent international resolutions that affect the Palestinian people, but they're not being enforced. And despite all this suffering and the occupation, you all know how Shirin Abu Akleh, the Palestinian journalist who was murdered. We have more than 100 journalists that were murdered. And why? Because women cannot speak out about what is happening in Palestine. We've seen other journalists that have been attacked in front of the cameras around the world. We have a constant intimidation. How far are they going to get? So I'm asking everyone, do we have the right to live just like the rest? We need freedom, justice, equality, and dignity. We don't need anything more. And these criteria, do they exist already? Are those rights that are guaranteed by international resolutions or not? When I ask for equality, for law enforcement, for equity, well, all of these are factors that we don't have in Palestine. There are many families that live out in the open because their houses are not rebuilt once destroyed, and the international community does not support them. We have a constant occupation. We have British, Jordanian, and Egyptian legislation. And despite all this situation, we have managed to obtain several achievements that we're incredibly proud of. But before I delve into that, I would like the Israeli occupation to come to an end, and I would like our free voices to say that Palestinian women have the same right to live as all the rest of the women around the world. We have the right to have the safety within our homes. We have the right to have our economic empowerment. When we talk about 61% of Palestinian women who are university graduates, and we only have 70% of those women who have access to the labor market, this is a problem because it means that there's a blockage in the Gaza Strip due to which women cannot have access to an effective economic empowerment. Women cannot work. So we cannot achieve the economic empowerment of women. And as women cannot play a role when we talk about climate change, my child and myself, we cannot even feel safe because we can actually suffer from the Israeli occupation. The Israeli people can arrive to our homes, can set those homes on fire. And they have the protection of the Israeli army. So we don't even have the right on our own territories. So we've managed to achieve a recognition of the borders in 67. Now, this is an important question. However, Palestinian authorities have worked on regulations on the one hand, they've deployed strategies and programs, and they've also launched social campaigns. I'm not going to talk for long about legislations because I already covered them in the morning, but I would only like to focus on two issues. First of all, on maternity leave that used to be 70 days long and now is 90 days long. The paternity leave now is 3 days long for fathers, they're remunerated days, and now women have the right to transfer their nationalities to their children whenever they are married to non-Palestinians. We've passed different laws, we've increased the day for legal marriage, and that now is 18, and now we almost don't have marriages of people who are younger than 18. We have a strategy to fight against violence, a strategy to promote the participation of women in policies, and we have another strategy to promote the economic empowerment of women. We have the 1325 strategy. I participated in the Abu Dhabi conference in which 109 countries participated. So the question is, how can we deploy strategies if we don't have proper funding? How can we monitor these strategies without such funding? So when we're talking about strategies, we need to guarantee funding for such strategies. We work with the media. We've trained media officials in subjects related to violence against women and girls so that they can know how to report on these issues. Now we're working with young leaders and we're working on university curriculum. But I would like to put forward two questions. First of all, we're all talking about gender violence. And I know that nowadays the proportion of gender-based violence in 2019 was 26%, and in 2021 is 61%, and in 2022 is 70%. So nowadays, instead of having a decrease in violence, we have an increase of violence. In Palestine, we have an increase in general violence. So are our programs concrete? I believe that when we carry out these programs, whoever pays the bill for them whenever they prove ineffective, it's women. So that's why we need to create programs whose costs won't be borne by women. How can we deploy programs that effectively contribute to diminish gender-based violence so that women do not suffer from the failure of these programs? Being women, of course, a particularly vulnerable part of the population. Well, that entails working along two lines. First, to work on the change of mindset when it comes to equality within the framework of an overarching social dialogue. We need to work with young people. We need to make sure that young people are at the core of our policies. We also need to work on curricula. We need to train teachers about human rights, democracy, and gender concepts, because it is them who are going to teach these subjects to the younger generations. We need to create a framework for gender advocates. We've worked a lot with women, but we can't keep on working with women if we want to change and reduce violence. We need to work with men and women equally. We need to extend the participation in order to create a strong alliance and leverage digital technology. How can we make the most out of civil society organizations? Well, we need to find that out. I don't want to talk about domestic violence, because I believe that we cannot only focus on one kind of violence, because violence is social, economic, and domestic. So we cannot minimize or reduce gender-based violence, but we need to actually cover all of these different aspects.
Now we move to Ms. Rodriguez, who will share with us the Spanish experience.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, and thank you to all of the authorities who are present here, all of the distinguished members of this Congress who are present over here. Then on behalf of my ministry and as Secretary of State for Equality and Against Gender Violence, I would like to thank you for your participation in this conference that I believe is going to actually bring debates that are going to go beyond whatever we approved, particularly after this last participation. And therefore, I can say that we have a lot to say from the perspectives of the different countries that are present here nowadays. First of all, I would like to congratulate us all, because I believe that the Union for Mediterranean has chosen to keep on working on gender issues, and I believe that there are other areas that haven't chosen this area. So I believe that despite discrepancies we might have, all of us who are present here, we can feel proud of ourselves to keep on getting together and working on progressing on those pillars, among which are the fight against all kinds of violence suffered by women. I would also like to point out that a lot has changed since the Cairo conference in 2017. The first of them actually deals with the approval of the 35th resolution about the banning of violence against women. And this prohibition needs to be part of the internal jurisdiction of all of the parties that are part of this union. And I believe that this requires a number of public policies. But I would also like to reflect about how things have changed since then. Even though 2017 seems very recent, it's true that COVID-19 and the economic crisis resulting from the Ukraine war, I'll talk about that later, has placed us in a very difficult position in which we need to analyze once more what's the situation that women experience with increasing difficulties, as the representative of Palestine has pointed out. What happens in Spain when the pandemic hit us? Well, we were fortunate enough to be one of the very few countries around the world that decided that part of the mechanisms that we were going to put in place in order to protect citizens from the situation we were experiencing was related to applying gender responsive policies. For example, during the lockdown, we were telling women to stay at home because they were going to be safer like that, but we used a telephone line for victims of violence, and we received messages from women that were experiencing violence within their homes. So one of our priorities was to convey women the message that they could leave their homes if they were going to feel safer, because we believe that these hotlines needed to become tools for these women to have the emotional, psychological support that they needed, and also the legal advice they might have needed in those times of difficulties. This time is here to stay, and nowadays is a success. And this 016 hotline is very successful nowadays. It provides emotional and psychological support and legal advice, and it does it through this hotline and through WhatsApp, I believe, as well. And I think that this is a particularly useful tool, particularly for younger women who don't feel comfortable having an actual conversation about the violence that they suffer. However, this wasn't the main objective of this government, because we actually wanted to ratify the Istanbul Convention, and these tools focus on the violence suffered by women on the hands of their intimate partners or former partners. But we had all of those other kinds of violence that we needed to address, as well as female genital mutilation, forced marriage, trafficking of women, harassment within the labor market, and, for example, harassment on the streets, or even digital violence, amongst others. In this regard, this is one of the very first measures that we took to the Council of Ministries whenever this equality ministry was created. That is the second equality ministry to exist in the democratic history of our country. And we passed a law against all sorts of violence against women. That it's a law called that only yes means yes, that provides support and protection to all these women, and that causes a fundamental change in the penal code of our country, so that women only need to say whether they really wanted to have that sexual relationship. If there wasn't a resounding yes, then that means that it was an aggression. And this is something that is set forth by the Istanbul Convention. And there are many countries still within Europe that need to adapt their penal code so that they comply with this convention, the way Spain has done. Of course, we haven't stopped here. In Spain, we have a historical problem that we have ignored for way too long, that is related to the trafficking of women. We have undertaken several measures over the last year to protect women who are victims of trafficking, and we might be taking the last step so that we can pass an overarching law against all kinds of trafficking that will protect these women. None of these measures would have been possible without a state pact against gender-based violence. And I would like to remember this over here, because in our country in 2017, we ratified an state pact in which all of the political parties took part, and this pact is still present and in force nowadays, and it is fundamental to allocate financing in order to deploy these policies that we're talking about nowadays. This state pact forces all of the governments in Spain to allocate a percentage that needs to increase every year in order to fight against sexist violence. And without this pact, there is an overarching pact, not only among political parties, but with citizens and the governments of the different territories in our country, we wouldn't have been able to deploy the public policies that we're talking about nowadays. And we couldn't have done it with a very powerful feminist movement that hasn't always pushed all of those legislations we have passed, but has also provided us with the strength that we needed in order to occupy leadership positions within the government. These measures, for example, deal with the way the victims of gender-based violence are counted, because in the past we only counted as gender-based violence those murders, for example, carried out by intimate partners, and whenever those women were murdered by, for example, a relative, they weren't counted as a case of gender-based violence, and this would send a wrong message, and that's why we have changed the way in which feminicides are counted, and I believe that this is a very important step we have taken. So how many women have been murdered and have had no justice because we haven't counted their cases as cases of gender-based violence? We need to do so because Reparation is as important within public policies as protection, prevention, or the pertinent penal sanction. In addition, I would also like to talk about political violence. I believe that many of the women who are here might be suffering from political violence because we're defending the rights of women. I believe that this is an issue that we need to reflect about in public. I believe that we need to mention political violence within all of international organizations as a form, as another way of violence against women. Because if we don't take it seriously, it would be more and more difficult to defend women's rights without paying the repercussions and consequences of it, not only in social media, not only in the way of threats of the way or a public complete constant scrutiny of the way we work, because this is some sort of message for everybody. It doesn't matter where we live. If we are women and we take part in the political life, this has consequences. And probably this doesn't even have to do with representing left-wing or social democrat parties, or clearly left-wing parties like it is my case. I think it is related to the fact that we are women, and it's something that we need to reflect about so that we can reach to a conclusion how we got to this point. In order to wrap up, I would like to reflect about the conflict in Ukraine that has reversed the situation that women had in our country and in Europe in general. It's forced us to look at ourselves in the mirror. A war is it's the event that can have the worst consequences of women in the shape of sexual violence, migration, exile, and very difficult situations. That's why we need to prepare an urgent and important response to it. And I believe that that's why we've taken the decision to provide a temporary protection for all refugees, and particularly female refugees. But this is not enough. I would like to say here that we have some victims that are being left behind. I'd like to remind the spirit that pushed all of these countries to sit together in this forum, and so that this Mare Nostrum could be a place for peace. But as long as there are parts of this union that are in tension, that are undergoing conflict, that are suffering from situations, as our colleague from Palestine perfectly explained, and I would like to show her my solidarity. As long as this happens, it won't be possible for us to talk about the fight against all sorts of violence against women. As long as there are deaths in the Mediterranean and murders in the Mediterranean that we take no responsibility for, we won't be able to say that we live in democracy, and we won't be able to say that we are reaching progress. And I think that women play a fundamental role in this regard, because I believe that women in politics have the capacity to take different measures. If we are capable to do so, and particularly all of us who are part of this Union for the Mediterranean, we can stop these deaths in the Mediterranean. We can stop the situation in Palestine, and we can actually stop the vulnerable and difficult situation of refugees. If we want it, we can have peace. It's a point of political willingness, and it's a feminist fight. Thank you very much for being here in Madrid these days. I truly believe that we can recover the spirit that pushed for the birth of this union some years ago, and we need to keep that hope alive, because if those of us who are in politics don't believe that peace is possible, then why are we taking part in politics? Thank you.
Thank you. Now we move to our last speaker. Ms. Pejovic, the floor is yours. Thank you for your patience.
It's okay. Here. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be part of this panel and share with you the experience, challenges, and best practices of Montenegro about this important issue. I will be short because I'm at the end of this panel, and I will try to be very very short. Thank you. As a candidate country for joining the European Union, Montenegro realized all the goals that reduce gender discrimination. Our legislative and strategic documents are harmonized with international documents in this area. They all aim to achieve full gender equality through clarify defined indicators. Montenegro signed the Istanbul Convention and ratifies it among the first 5 countries. We sent also a second report of implementation of to the Graver Committee at the beginning of this year. I must say that the government of Montenegro has set one of the strategic goals, the suppression of all forms of gender-based violence and improvement the position and protection of the rights of the victims of violence. I said that the awareness in Montenegrin citizens is gradually changing regarding domestic violence and violence against women. According to the latest research, a significant majority of the society believes that violence is a big problem in our society. The research shows that family violence is widespread, as well the number of those who successfully recognize different forms of violent behavior. Women and children are recognized as the most frequent victims of violence. There is a stronger awareness that is necessary to report any violence to the competent institution. Increase of the number report case and annual is the indicator for the implementation of the law on protection from domestic violence in practice, as well as the visibility of the phenomenon itself. Montenegro has taken the necessary steps to resolve this issue. In addition to the legislative framework and international standard, it has adopted the protocol of procedure, developing a database, thereby ensure the inter-institutional response. It is especially important to bear in mind in the fact that during the period of the COVID pandemic, Montenegro developed a crisis plan for the suppression of the violence. Despite of these steps taken, Montenegro still has serious work ahead in order to make the prevention and protection of the victims more effective by further improving the legislation, but also by the building and the capacity of the relevant actors who work on protection and prevention from violence. This approach to problem solving was addressed by the Montenegro to the objective and measured action plan for implementation of Istanbul Convention. With the aim of suppression and protection from violence, we have also initiated legislative reforms. Amendments are being made to the several laws. These laws will be fully aligned with the Istanbul Convention and the recommendation of the Graver Committee. It is necessary that the struggle for strengthening the role of women in society is constant, open, joined, and strong. I emphasize the need to comfort violence from all levels and from all aspects through the strengthening interinstitutional cooperation with civil sector and media and local authorities. In the end, I want to emphasize once more that no one should tolerate or hide violence. It is never too much to talk about this topic. The first step towards liberation is the reaction of the victims, the recognition of themselves as victims, and the feeling to be free to ask for the necessary help that the state is obliged to provide. Thank you for it.
Thank you so much for the panelists for sharing the experiences in your countries. I think if there is any way to summarize this session is that there are different types of violence against women.
beside the violence that is physical, psychological, mental, there is also the political violence, the social violence, and the economic violence. Thank you so much for your insights, and please look at this very beautiful summary of our session that basically gives a glimpse on what is done in the four countries and what should be done for the future. This is the end of our session today. Thank you so much for being attentive and very active. Tomorrow we will continue with the discussions, so make sure to be active and participate. And I believe after this session, there is a networking cocktail. Thank you.